The first time I heard my name in that building, my real name, was the day I signed the merger that would make national headlines. But rewind exactly 3 minutes before that, and I was standing in a broom closet with a fingerprint scanner hidden behind a mop handle, watching my security cam feed while every partner on the 43rd floor stared at a blank signature line, clueless. Funny thing about power. When you wear it loud, they fear you. When you wear it quiet, they forget you exist. And that's when they become useful. 15 years ago, I stepped out of my own company, voluntarily, disappeared into a paper trail so tangled you'd need 6 court orders and a medium to find me. Not because I was scared, because I was tired of the boardroom politics, of smiling at investors while my co-founder stole credit and snorted half our IPO bonus off the damn conference table, sold off public shares under aliases, stashed patents in obscure holding core, recruited 2 interns, trained them in silence, and watched them climb to VP in 6 years thinking they'd done it on their own. And I walked those halls, coffee-stained hoodie and a fake limp, every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork. Watched them gossip in elevators. Watched them rehearse charm in mirrors. Watched them lie through their bleached veneers and laugh like they'd earned it. One asked why a freelance analyst had a level 9 clearance badge, or why the CFO's assistant always paused before greeting me like a glitch in the Matrix. The plan was never revenge, it was observation. Study the beast, learn its appetite, then wait, and then came the click, a rumor. Galton Tech was buying out Lyrasis. Billion-dollar merger. Quiet at first. Whispers between partners, shredded memos, midnight phone calls. But I heard everything. The silent microphones I installed in the custom crown molding 8 years ago. I watched the CEO of Lyrasis, Connor Bell, sweat bullets under stage lights while pitching a seamless future of integrated ecosystems. Which is rich, coming from a man who once tried to blacklist me from the very industry I invented. He didn't know I owned 13% of Galton through Burnham Vale Capital. Didn't know I was Burnham Vale Capital. No, I also controlled the land his secondary data center sat on. Bought it through a realty firm out of Des Moines. He didn't know any of it until the boardroom, until that line just need Burnham's signature. And I stepped out from the corner, coffee in hand, hoodie zipped, pulled out my pen, let them watch, every single one, their pupils dilated like car crash victims. Someone whispered my name like it was an incantation. Connor choked mid-sentence, hadn't even signed yet. And they were already scrambling to remember how many times they'd mocked the weird guy in the hoodie. I clicked the pen, and the room held its breath like judgment was coming, because it was. Connor's voice cracked first. That always happens, throats go dry when power shifts without warning. Wait, he stammered, blinking like he could erase me if he just didn't focus. He's not, someone verify this, but no one moved, because deep down they knew. Can't fake that kind of silence. You can't fake a room folding in on itself. The head of legal, Dana something, scrambled for a folder. Her fingers shook so bad she flipped the wrong page twice. Meanwhile, I uncapped the pen and slowly, deliberately, signed my full legal name. The one they scrubbed off the original Articles of Incorporation in 2011. The one Connor had buried under a fabricated resignation when he called me unfit for leadership. Ink dried faster than their dignity. Then I slid the folder forward, met Connor's eyes, and said, calm as a morgue drawer, you just merged with your ghost. Connor sat down without realizing it, like gravity had suddenly remembered him. But here's what none of them knew, what I hadn't said yet. This wasn't a last laugh. It was Act 1, because I didn't just sign that merger. I engineered it. The first whisper between Galton's junior M and an analyst and her contact at Lyrasis. I'd been feeding intel, planting documents, controlling leaks. I was the invisible architect behind every decision they thought was theirs. The merger wasn't a partnership. It was a Trojan horse, and inside it, me. I spent the next 4 hours in that building like I always had, quiet, observing. But this time, the air around me buzzed like a cut wire. VP named Elena tried to make small talk near the elevators. Didn't realize you were involved. I just smiled. Some things don't need announcements. They just arrive. She didn't laugh. Nobody did. Upstairs in my old office, now rebranded as a meditation pod. Because of course it was. I stood in the corner where they used to hang my portrait. The wall was blank now. Sterile. Until I pressed my thumb to the sensor hidden behind the fake bamboo paneling. Lights dimmed. A drawer hissed open. Inside, a single black notebook. My next move was already written, because taking back control was never the goal. Making them need me again, that was the real game. And they were about to learn, ghosts don't haunt, they reclaim. The notebook weighed less than I remembered. Maybe because the last time I touched it, I was still trying to save this place. Back when I believed legacy mattered more than leverage. For I learned the world doesn't reward builders, it rewards illusionists. I flipped to page 42. The list was still there in my handwriting, tight, angular, deliberate. A catalog of everyone who betrayed me, underestimated me, or tried to outmaneuver me, each name marked with a symbol. Connor Bell had a black triangle, meaning cut off his oxygen, then his options. I left the notebook open on the desk, walked back to the glass wall, stared down at the city I'd been living above, not inside. The skyline glowed like a lie, all shine, no soul. Behind me, the meditation pod door opened without a knock. It was Jake, the intern I'd plucked out of state college with a resume written on a napkin, now wearing a blazer that cost more than my first car. "Sir," he said, like it physically pained him to remember the word. "Connor wants to talk, privately." I turned slowly, studied his face, didn't recognize the expression I wore because he'd never seen it before. "He had plenty of time to talk," I said, voice flat as a blueprint. 15 years of walking past me without so much as a nod. "He can wait." Jake blinked. This isn't how it works. There are shareholders, regulators. Sit down, Jake." He froze. I said sit. And to his credit, he did, slowly, like a man approaching the edge of something vast and dark. I walked to the wall panel, tapped a hidden code. The glass behind me fogged instantly, soundproofing activated. "You remember the ethics presentation you gave last quarter?" I asked. He nodded, throat clicking. "You said no one is above accountability." Another nod. I pulled out a small envelope, dropped it on the table in front of him. Inside were 3 things: a flash drive, a contract amendment, and a photo. He looked at the photo first. His face went pale. "Tell Connor," I said, "if he wants to keep his offshore holdings off the SEC radar, he'll transfer voting control to Burnham Vale before end of day." Jake didn't move. "And tell HR," I added, "that their whistleblower hotline's about to be flooded." The silence grew legs, marched around the room. "You planned this," he whispered, "since before you learned to tie a Windsor knot." I watched his hands shake as he stood. He left without another word. And just like that, the second domino tipped. By morning, the board would panic. Investors would scramble, and me? I'd be exactly where I belonged, above the fire, holding the match. The first call came at 6:03 a.m. sharp. Unknown number. Unspoken panic. I let it ring out, twice. Then picked up on the third. "Is this Burnham Vale?" the voice asked, brittle and trying too hard not to beg. "No," I said, watching the sunrise burn through the skyline, "but he's listening." The line went dead. By 6:45, 3 more calls. One from a lyricist board member I hadn't heard from since she toasted my departure in 09 with a bottle of Dom. Another from Galton's in-house counsel, voice trembling, asking if we could chat before the markets open. And the last, a voicemail from Connor, slurred, half desperate, half defiant. "I don't know what the hell this is, but it's not gonna stick. I built this company, I saved that one. For later." Meanwhile, documents on the flash drive I gave Jake were spreading like gasoline on marble. Every file dated, time-stamped, linked to offshore shell firms tied to Connor's brother-in-law in Belize. The crown jewel? A 10-minute audio file of Connor admitting to manipulating quarterly earnings to keep the whales happy. The same audio I recorded 2 years ago, when he laughed about how dead weight like me had finally been scrubbed out of the picture. Board meeting that morning was supposed to be a press rehearsal for the merger. Instead, it turned into a witch hunt. From the privacy of a secure conference room 1 floor above, I watched it unfold through the internal feed I'd never lost access to. The boardroom cam 0014, had been rewired years ago, behind the painting of the founder. They thought it was decommissioned. They always think that. Connor walked in late, shirt wrinkled, tie crooked, eyes shot. His voice cracked as he addressed the board, trying to get ahead of the leaks. "We don't know who's doing this or why. Wrong. You do know. And you do know why." I watched as one by one the board turned on him. Elena, the same VP who tried small talk in the elevator, spoke first. "We were told the final signature came from the owner of Burnham Vale, but no one here seems to know who that is." Connor froze, just for a second. Then, "He's lying. That guy. Consultant, he's not. He doesn't have the right," but that was it. The moment. Because one of the junior partners, a fresh Ivy grad with more ambition than sense, interrupted. "I saw the ownership registry this morning. Burnham's name is listed as primary voting authority effective immediately." Connor's mouth opened, then closed. And in that instant, it happened. The man who'd spent 15 years rewriting history realized he was no longer in it. I leaned back in the chair, watching my former empire collapse under the weight of a single signature. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because now, with the board shaken and the public announcement pending, all eyes would be on the one man they couldn't place. the one who'd been walking past them, invisible. And next time they saw me, I wouldn't be in the shadows. I'd be at the head of the table, and I'd be asking questions. By noon, the first ripple of panic hit the press. It started as a minor rumor, thing about unforeseen complications in the merger process, but by 1:00 p.m., it had turned into a full-fledged media storm. The headline was simple enough, if you didn't know the backstory. Galton Tech's billion-dollar merger faces unanticipated roadblocks. The reporters were scrambling for answers, but none of them had the right questions. The truth was too complex to fit into a 500-word piece about corporate strategy. It didn't involve just one deal. It was a chain of lies, stock manipulations, and offshore holdings, a tangled web that the world wasn't ready for. I had a seat at the table for the next round of chaos, but I wasn't going to be there physically. Instead, I was tucked away in my apartment downtown, a cheap place near the water, not even 10 blocks from their headquarters. The perfect vantage point, just high enough to see everything through the windows of the building I'd once owned. I wasn't watching it burn from the sidelines. I was orchestrating it. Connor's calls came flooding in by the minute, desperate, furious, pleading for anything to stop the leaks. His voice was hoarse, trembling now. He didn't realize that I'd already anticipated his every move. He thought his lawyers could fix this. That check could make the problem go away. There was no check big enough to cover the truth. By 3:00 p.m., a second document dropped onto the wire. The headline was even more damning. SEC launches investigation into Lyris's financial reporting. Whistleblower claims to have audio proof. It was my proof, and it had just hit every major media outlet in real time. Connor couldn't fight what was coming. His voice on the phone cracked one last time, tried to leverage the remaining value in the merger, pushing for control of the PR narrative. But the moment I heard the desperation in his tone, I knew the game was over for him. I hung up on him. It was time to make my move. I stood in front of the window, watching the city that had turned its back on me. The skyline shimmered in the late afternoon light, a perfect blend of ambition and illusion. It looked almost beautiful, something I could burn down without anyone noticing. But it wasn't the city I was going after. It was the people who thought they could erase me, the ones who'd laughed, whispered, and ignored my worth for the last decade and a half. Now they were going to see me, but not as the ghost they thought they knew. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I was the one who had been controlling this whole play from the back. I had them now, each one by the throat, and I was going to squeeze. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Jake. Connors requesting a face-to-face. He says it's urgent. I smiled. Let him wait, I typed back. Because some things don't need to be rushed. The game had already been won. Now, it was time to let them experience the slow burn of realizing just how far they had underestimated me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the phone rang one more time. I picked it up without hesitation. "I'm ready," I said. That was all I needed to say. By the time I arrived at the boardroom, the walls had already started closing in. Connor was pacing by the windows, his reflection distorted in the glass as if the world itself was turning against him. The smell of freshly brewed coffee barely masked the panic hanging in the air. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "I've tried everything," he muttered under his breath, like he was talking to himself. "They're not buying the lies anymore." The sec. "Press, this is too big." I didn't respond, not immediately. I just let the silence hang between us, thick with the weight of what had already happened. Finally, Connor turned. His face was haggard, like he hadn't slept for days. His suit, once pristine, now hung on him like a carcass. The arrogance I'd once seen in him, the swagger that made him think he could control everything, had completely evaporated. In its place was fear, raw, tangible fear. "Don't know who you are anymore," he spat. "What the hell is this?" I let the question hang in the air. It was a simple one, but one he couldn't possibly comprehend. "The truth?" I asked quietly, walking across the room and pulling a chair out from the polished conference table. "You've been living in a house of cards, Connor. I've been building it all along." He stared at me, blinking in disbelief. "I never left, Connor. Not really. We're just too busy playing the part of a CEO to notice who was really pulling the strings. Every leak, every piece of intel you thought you had was mine. Every deal you thought you controlled, I wrote it. Every number you thought was yours, I set it up." The room felt smaller as I spoke. I watched his face twist from confusion to realization, his expression slowly shifting into something darker. The walls seemed to close in on him. "Why?" he whispered. "Why?" I repeated, almost amused. "You want to know why?" I stood up from the chair and slowly walked toward the window, looking out over the city that had been my playground for years. "You're asking the wrong question, Connor," I said, my voice colder now. "The real question is, why didn't you see it coming? And then it clicked for him. I saw it in his eyes. The moment the last piece of the puzzle locked into place. The man who had spent years at the top, manipulating others, undermining anyone who got in his way, he finally understood how I'd been right there, watching, pulling every string without him ever knowing it. He staggered back, collapsing into a chair. I don't have anything left, he muttered. I smiled. It wasn't satisfaction, though. It was something more professional. You never did, Connor, I said. You just thought you did. The silence between us deepened. But I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. I took the final step, leaning in close enough that he could feel the weight of every word I said next. You're going to fix this, I told him. You're going to sign the documents, turn over control, and then you're going to disappear. And if you think for 1 second I'm bluffing, if you think this is just some game you can outsmart like you've done to everyone else, well, then you haven't been paying attention for the last 15 years. I stood back, letting the words settle like dust in the air. Connor was broken. His empire was in shambles, and I, the ghost in the background, had just taken everything from him. Now, all that was left was to watch him crumble and ensure the final blow came when he least expected it. The next few hours felt like a slow-motion collapse. I watched as Connor's defiance crumbled piece by piece, his proud facade wilting under the pressure of reality. He tried every angle he could, pleading, negotiating, promising that he would make it right. But there was nothing left to fix. His empire had already been gutted, the walls hollowed out, the foundation shaking under its own weight. I knew how this would end. The moment he gave up the control he'd fought so hard for, the game would be over. But even in that moment, I was patient. I had nothing to prove anymore. The second I left the boardroom, I placed the call. To the press. To the SEC. Everyone who needed to hear the truth. But not too soon. Timing, after all, is everything. By the time the press caught wind of what had really happened at the merger, the damage was done. News outlets, social media feeds, and blogs exploded with the details. The audio leak, the offshore accounts, the false earnings reports, the SEC investigation. Connor's empire was nothing more than smoke and mirrors, and now the whole world was watching it burn to the ground. Phone rang again, this time from Elena. I don't know what you've done, but you're going to ruin everything, she said, her voice frantic. You've destroyed our credibility, you've destroyed everything we've worked for. This is corporate terrorism. I chuckled. No, Elena, I said, this is corporate justice. The next call came from Jake, and he sounded almost like a broken man. What did you want me to do, huh? I didn't know. I thought you were just a consultant. His voice cracked. Why are you doing this? You already had it all. You could have walked away. I did walk away, I told him. I've been walking away every day for years. I just wasn't done watching yet. There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought maybe Jake was finally getting it. But then he asked the question I knew was coming. Are you going to ruin me too? I smiled. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either. You're just collateral damage. Don't take it personally. By the time the shareholders' meeting rolled around, I'd already taken my place at the table. They didn't expect me. No one did. I watched as the room slowly filled with suits and high-powered executives who thought they controlled the game. They filed in with the same false confidence they always had, eyes flicking to their phones, pretending to look calm while their worlds crumbled around them. And then Connor walked in, shoulders slumped, his tie loose, face drawn and pale. For all the money and power he'd accumulated, he looked like a man on the brink of collapse. His empire was now nothing more than a sinking ship, and he was the last one left on it. I was the first to speak. Gentlemen, I said, voice steady, cutting through the murmurs of confusion. If we're done pretending, we can finally get to work. This company doesn't belong to any of you anymore. It belongs to me. I've controlled it from the start, and now I'm taking the reins. I met Connor's eyes. They were hollow, lifeless. Welcome to the reality you built. I could almost hear the collective breath of the room being held. There was no applause, no gasps of admiration, just the cold, silent recognition of a man who had outlasted them all. The board shuffled uncomfortably, looking to each other for guidance, but the power had already shifted. It was mine now. All of it. I hadn't even broken a sweat. The days that followed were nothing more than a formalities parade, each step more predictable than the last. The board, now reduced to puppets with frayed strings, agreed to my terms without hesitation. The press conferences came next, a slow drip of information about the fall of a CEO and the rise of an invisible giant. The media lapped it up, and in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but laugh. They still didn't know the full story. The shareholder meeting, I stood at the podium, looking down at the faces of the very people who had once snubbed me, ignored me, and laughed behind my back. The very same people who thought their wealth and influence could protect them from the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, voice calm and measured. Today marks the dawn of a new era. A new era where power no longer comes from prestige, but from patience. A new era where the invisible become visible. Connor, sitting across the room, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His face was a ghostly pale mask of defeat. I watched him as I spoke, savoring the moment, the culmination of everything I'd planned. He'd spent years building a name that he thought was untouchable, and now it was mine to tear down. As I continued with the press briefing, the realization settled in. I wasn't just the one to pull off the merger. I was the one who had crafted it, twisted it into something that only I controlled. Galton Tech, lyricist, Burnham Vale, all of it was in my hands. I'm not interested in profit for profit's sake, I said, locking eyes with the room, each of them now silently begging for a chance at survival. I'm interested in legacy, in power, in building something that lasts, and what I've built is untouchable. It wasn't just the company that had changed hands. The game itself had shifted. The people who had once sneered at me, who had written me off as nothing more than a faceless cog in the corporate machine, were now looking at me with fear and respect. The next few weeks passed in a blur of boardroom decisions, policy changes, and quiet retribution. One by one, those who had conspired against me, those who thought they could outplay the invisible man, were quietly moved aside. Some resigned, others were fired, and a few simply disappeared. No fuss, no headlines, just the quiet unraveling of a life they had built on lies. Connor's fall from grace was as swift as it was inevitable. The press painted him as a villain, a man who had betrayed the company he helped build. He tried to fight back, but the more he struggled, the more he cemented his own destruction. Within 6 months, he was completely irrelevant, his name tarnished, his future uncertain. But me, I was untouchable. The new CEO, quiet mastermind who had built an empire without anyone ever noticing. I stood on the balcony of my office, the same office I had once watched from the shadows, now fully in control of the very empire I had built. The city stretched out before me, and for the first time in 15 years, I saw it all with clarity. Everything I had ever worked for had led to this. A quiet victory. A slow burn that no one saw coming until it was already too late. The game had ended, and I had won,